Wolfenstein is one of the most consistent franchises in gaming history. The franchise started back in 1981 and has managed to reinvent itself and stay relevant for 40 years. Looking ahead, Wolfenstein 3 is being developed, so let's break down everything we know about the upcoming title, all the rumors and speculation. As always, all the links to the original sources will be linked down below, so make sure to check those out. And with that out of the way, let's get right into it. Now, one more thing that I will say before we get into all the news is there are spoilers. I will talk about Youngblood, Wolfenstein 2, and any other pieces of information that I think are relevant leading into Wolfenstein 3. So if you haven't played these games or don't want anything spoiled, or you still might go play them, I would just turn away right now. But the current Wolfenstein games are being developed by Machine Games. From the beginning, Machine Games has said this current iteration was going to be a trilogy. Now, I will say, since Machine Games has taken over as the primary developer of the series, the current iteration is thought to be a reboot, or at least a partial reboot compared to all the previous games. It is confusing which games, if any, Machine still considers as canon. The current trilogy does mention Return to Castle Wolfenstein, the 2009 Wolfenstein, and Wolfenstein 3D, but it's not known exactly if these are just references, or if they are just keeping some bits of canon but not the entire game. Now, that could be a whole separate video, but for the sake of this video, let's consider the current trilogy a new modified canon. Also, Old Blood and Young Blood are both side games. They are canon in this current iteration, but just don't count as main series games in terms of the trilogy. So I know people might say, did Young Blood end the trilogy? No, we're still going to get an actual Wolfenstein 3. Now, I want to get both those out of the way because it seems like there's still confusion within the community about canon and the trilogy itself. Moving on, Game Informer interviewed the creative director of the first two games of the series, Jen Matthews, and Matthews gave an explanation as to why they wanted a trilogy to begin with. He said, quote, "I think envisioning it as a trilogy was our way of putting a boundary around it. It's not infinite. This thing, you can't see the end of it. It's been helpful to conceptualize it that way, and structure our work and lives around it helps keeps the chaos at bay." Which makes sense. It's nice to know they've wanted to only make a certain amount of games since the beginning and keep it all intact. Something else that ties with this is what the ending of the trilogy will look like, and I think a lot of fans have already speculated this will be the case. Jen Matthews later did an interview with Giant Bomb when promoting Wolfenstein 2 back in 2017 and was asked about Mecha Hitler. He said, quote, "If we get to make a third one, once you introduce Mecha Hitler, you can't go up from there." And this is what makes having a trilogy and a definitive ending very nice. It's known from the beginning that they're only going to make 3 games, and I assume they've planned out at least some ideas of what the end will look like from the very beginning when they started writing out these stories. And it sounds like they will be bringing back Mecha Hitler for the finale, and that will be maybe the final boss, or if not, a big piece of the ending game. Now, as I said before, even though Old Blood and Young Blood are not in the main trilogy, they are still considered canon and have to follow the rules set from the previous games. The game director of Young Blood, Jerk Gustafsson, hinted at what's to come in Wolfenstein 3 during an interview with VG 24/7. When asked why Hitler was killed off-screen between Wolfenstein 2 and Young Blood, he said, quote, "We are actually pretty strict when it comes to following the lore and the storyline, and so obviously some of these things that we haven't really told in the main storyline, say from New Order and New Colossus, those things have still happened, so we need to touch on them to some extent. We're actually explaining some of what happened during these years, but we are still staying very true to the storyline. And I know it might sound a bit weird or even controversial that we're actually mentioning that in the game as well, that your father was killing Hitler, but that already happened in Wolfenstein 3D as well. There are of course a lot of stories to tell within this universe and within the Wolfenstein IP as well, but those are for a later date." And then he closes by saying, quote, "Sometime in the future, it wouldn't surprise me if he comes back." And this is where the canon issues get confusing. He does bring in Wolfenstein 3D, that's when we killed Hitler. And I know fans were upset that Hitler died off screen between games that we actually did get to play, which is why I think bringing Hitler back as some sort of final boss in the third one would be a great way for fans to actually get to fight him in some heightened form. Maybe we'll see flashbacks of us actually killing him in the third one. There's a lot of possibilities, and I don't think they're done with telling this story. Now let's talk about the story beats that have been set up in previous entries that could continue on in Wolfenstein 3. In terms of Wolfenstein 2, the ending left a lot to be desired with the death of Engel, and it was pretty anticlimactic in terms of the series as a whole. The bigger implications for where the series is headed actually came from Wolfenstein Youngblood, which is unfortunate due to the fact that many fans of the series are skipping this entry and waiting for the next numbered release. But to understand the ending, we gotta give you guys a quick synopsis of the Youngblood story, just because I think a lot of people did not play this game. Youngblood takes place 19 years after the events of Wolfenstein 2. Blazkowicz is a hero for killing Hitler sometime during those 19 years. He marries Anya, and they have twin daughters. Now, Blazkowicz goes missing, so the daughters, once they are old enough, go searching for him. They head to France to find their dad, and during the adventures they find out that the Fourth Reich is planning to stage a coup in Berlin and infiltrate the French resistance. The story continues when the daughters find their father in Lab X, and they discover that when their father killed Hitler, the Nazis had a doomsday weapon that would activate when Hitler was killed, which would end up destroying the entire world. The weapon itself would change the weather and would keep changing it and making it more hostile until it ends humanity, so it would cause bigger storms. Another side plot has to do with the God Key, which was introduced in the new Colossus as a recovered alien artifact from Roswell. In Youngblood, it's expanded on greatly, and now they know it's an interdimensional doorway, essentially, which their father uses to see alternate realities. He sees one where the Nazis lost the war, but they still aren't sure how to use it completely, and if they can travel to these different realities or where else it can bring them. The game ends when Berlin is taken over by the Fourth Reich, and now the Fourth Reich is on their way to take over Paris. The Blazkowicz twins are sent to Paris to defend the city, and it's alluded to that the next big battles might take place in the sky as well. From an offhand comment in Youngblood where a member of the Fourth Reich mentions creating a new world in the heavens. Now I know Blazkowicz is old by the events of Youngblood, but I do assume they will continue to move the franchise forward in time, and I don't think that Wolfenstein 3 will cover those 19 years between 2 and Youngblood. If anything, that could be a DLC, or it might be covered in flashbacks in 3 or time travel, but I don't think we will play in those 19 years. I think they'll keep moving the story forward. And if the story does continue after the events of Youngblood, Blazkowicz will potentially use the God Key to find a way to stop the world-ending doomsday weapon by the Nazis, or potentially travel through time to stop it from happening, all while the current day his daughters are fighting off the Fourth Reich in Paris. I'd say it's safe to assume his daughters will be in the game as NPCs, and BJ will still be the main playable character. The last comments I want to make about Youngblood come in the terms of gameplay. Youngblood introduced co-op and microtransactions. Both mechanics are very polarizing in any community where the main games have always been single player. Microtransactions I see is very unlikely to be added into any future games. Doom Eternal was also published by Bethesda, and there were no microtransactions, and I think they mostly added them into Youngblood to test different ideas, and because they knew this game was a side game and probably wouldn't sell as many as a main entry series, so this could help alleviate some of those costs. Co-op, on the other hand, could be an additional mechanic we do see in the future. A current job listing for Machine Games lists a level designer where one of the qualifications for the job is, quote, experience with multiplayer level design. And considering the only games Machine Games has made so far are Wolfenstein and a Quake expansion, it's most likely for one of the two. Now, the Quake expansion was a special occasion for the 20th anniversary of the game, so it's unlikely that this hiring is for a different Quake property. And since most of their time is spent on Wolfenstein, I would say this job listing is most likely for Wolfenstein 3. And if you're scared about what that means for the future, I don't think you really have to be. Going back to a comment by the head of the studio, Jörg Gustafsson, he did an interview with Venture Beat when he was asked, quote, "You're on a road towards multiplayer. Do you think that's going to happen for you one of these days?" And Jörg responded saying, quote, "I'm pretty sure that whatever we do in the future, it will have an online component. You'll be able to play it with your friends, but with that said, what I feel is equally important, a very important thing for me personally, is a machine games title will always let you play solo. That's an important thing for us, so I'm pretty sure it'll be a combination." Which makes sense that, yes, there probably will be some online elements. The job listing supports that. Wolfenstein Youngblood being co-op supports that. But I still think it will always be a single player experience at the heart, and any multiplayer will be additional. Which, take that as you will. Maybe they won't include any multiplayer in this game, but we'll just have to wait and see. Now, to support this, we do know that Wolfenstein 3 is already in development and has been for quite a few years already. Pete Hines, the vice president of Bethesda's marketing department, did an interview with Metro UK back in 2018 before the release of Youngblood, and when asked about the future of the series and sales of Wolfenstein 2. He said Wolfenstein 2 did do well for the company, and although it could have done better, they still look at the game as a success. And the final question from Metro said, quote, "Ultimately, I just want you to guarantee there'll be a Wolfenstein 3 because I want to see how it ends." And Hines responded saying, quote, "Yeah, sure, absolutely we're making a Wolfenstein 3. They said on stage they're taking a break from the larger story to do this thing, but we'll have to see how that ends." He also says that Wolfenstein has been a good series for Bethesda, and even in 2018 they were moving forward with 2 more games in the franchise, which we now know are Youngblood and Wolfenstein 3. Which makes sense that they would greenlight them early on. That's really the only games that Machine Games works on. Youngblood was a good side game for them, and Wolfenstein 3 will be the next big thing they make. As for a release date, most of Machine Games titles follow the same patterns. They usually do a main game, and then 1 to 14 months later, they do a side game. So in 2014, that's when The New Order was released. 1 year later, in 2015, Old Blood was released, which is a side game. 2 years after that was New Colossus in 2017. And then 18 months after that, in 2019, was Youngblood. So I would say we are looking at least 2 years after the release of Youngblood. So at the earliest, I would say Wolfenstein 3 would release in fall of 2021. And who knows what that timeline actually looks like because of the current global situation happening right now. It could have easily been pushed to 2022, and it also depends how much work Machine Games has already done with the new consoles, because if it's not launching till 2021, I doubt it would only launch for the PS4 and Xbox One. I think they'd at least have to launch on both systems concurrently, or maybe even just next gen. But I would say earliest is fall 2021, and then if not, maybe fall 2022 if we saw some delays, or depending on how development is going on a new generation of consoles. Some fans were hoping we might see an early teaser from Bethesda at E3, but with E3 now being canceled completely, Bethesda came out and announced they won't hold their own event. So we'll just have to wait and see when the next time Bethesda wants to attend an event is, and if we might see an early teaser trailer for Wolfenstein 3. Especially with how far out they've been teasing Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield, it makes sense we'll probably see something even if we won't see the game for a year or two after that. The last comment I'll make is some fans think that Wolfenstein 3 will finally connect their universe to the Doom universe. There are a ton of theories about how the worlds are connected, so if you are interested, that could potentially finally happen too, either through the Doomsday device in Wolfenstein 3 or the God Key, but that's a whole separate video too, but something to look forward to if you are into that and if you have been following those theories pretty closely. And with that, that is everything we know about Wolfenstein 3. There's a lot of information, a lot of it's piecing together different story elements, and I do think that when they are ready to show things off, it will happen very quickly. As always, make sure to like and share this video, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.